so that we can ultimately help the patient for a better cure. Okay, so in diseases, mostly initially it was only about diagnosis, but later as things moved on, it was felt that if an early diagnosis can be done, then we can be much better able to plan a treatment regime. And this is very true for diseases like chronic kidney disease, where we have an increase in serum creatinine. Mostly what happens is that when the patient comes, by that time the condition has already worsened so far that even the drugs do not help much. Using the modern imaging modalities, we can screen up to a concentration as low as 10 micromolar, which is basically like an early biomarker for okay, an early biomarker for the detection of the disease. Whereas if we are having a normal blood concentration, we have to wait till the concentration doesn't increase 80 to 100 micromolar. So if we are able to use these imaging modalities, we can actually target the disease, say in stage 2 when it is mild to moderate or even below normal to moderate, rather than coming up to the stage 3 or stage later stages are anyways related to the kidney failure. The same case happens for the cancer. So I remember once our IIT professor said that if that the moment the person comes to know about the disease, they should get the medicines. But actually, at the molecular level, it is too late a time to even have benefits from the drugs. So an early stage cancer detection can do wonders. Whereas if we detect it late, obviously we have already missed the train. And this is a near percentage of the cancers which are detected in advanced stages. As you can see, the colon cancer, the colorectal cancer, the ovarian cancers are detected much later, in contrast to the breast or the prostate. And this also is evident by the number of people who recover from breast and prostate versus people who are recovering from colon or other cancers. So we use diagnostic imaging. Now, what is diagnostic imaging? It is a field of medicine which used in determining physiology, managing disease, and locating abnormalities in the body. It is not only restricted to finding about a disease. Diagnostic imaging can help us to not only understand the biochemical basis of the disease, but also to understand how a treatment response is happening inside the body. So basically, we are targeting chemical entities to visualize through different molecular imaging modalities. The main three molecular imaging modalities are PET, MRI, and optical imaging. These are the various scans which shows. So this is an MRI contrast where you can see the beginning of the tumor. Similarly, this is the famous DTPA or the MAC3 scan, which we do for the chronic kidney disease people to find out the efficiency of the kidney, how they are performing. So as I said, there are a number of imaging modalities, among which the molecular imaging are basically MRI, PET, SPECT, and optical. And this is our area of interest, to develop molecules which can be used for these imaging modalities. Now, why do we require molecules? Because the initial X-ray, CT, or ultrasound, they were dependent on the structural abnormalities. So maybe there is an edema, maybe there is a bone fracture. So using those as the endpoints, one used to use these imaging modalities to understand how the disease is progressing. Whereas MRI, PET, SPECT, and optical, they sometimes they rely on structural analogies like MRI. It can tell you if there is an edema. Otherwise, most of the time they also relies on small molecules which can go and give information in the different imaging modalities. A brief introduction about MRI. MRI is basically magnetic resonance imaging. It uses the principles of NMR. So this is an MRI machine. A gantry is there where the patient lies down, and this is all the magnets. So there are superconducting magnets which are there, and they are used for taking out the spectra. The SPECT or the PECT imaging, where we are making use of the nuclear decay of the radioisotopes. In one case, we require gamma. Gamma rays are a type of nuclear radiation which are very high in energy. And they also penetrate through. And the other one uses positron emitting radioisotopes. So positron is the proton with no mass but positive charge, and when it is ejected out, it basically annihilates with an electron which is present in the environment, and then two photons are irradiated of 511 kilo electron volts, which are basically detected by the PET scanner. So these are the different imaging modalities which are used. And as we move from this spectrum of the imaging modality to this one, we are moving towards quantitative information as well as qualitative. So, but we are also having quantitative information, as well as our specificity and sensitivity are also increasing. So how did it all start? It started when, so this is the first scan, which was of X-ray. And this was the scan. It's a very famous image. If you start searching about the discovery of radioisotopes, this scan comes as the first image. This was done by Roentgen, and this is the image of his wife's hand. And he was basically studying X-rays, and then he realized that X-rays cannot penetrate the bones, and wherever the bones were there, they appeared as opaque. So it started with this, but further work was done by Becquerel and Marie Curie, especially when they were trying to isolate radioisotopes from uranium. And this led Marie Curie to isolate radium. And she loved radium so much that she used to carry it in her pocket. These are very famous stories about how the discovery was made. So initially, radium was used along with radon, and even it was used for tumor studies in 1913s and 14. Later, the George D. Hersey, he's the father of nuclear medicine. He gave the concept of tracer technique, and he was the one who started using radioisotopes for not for imaging, but as tracers. So he could find out the way how the nutrients are moving up the plant using 32 phosphorus. Indeed, a very famous incident is that he also catch his landlady while mixing the stale food with the fresh food using the same tracer principle. So he was the one who actually started with this. And over the years, things kept on moving, and ultimately 99 technetium was discovered. Now, 99 technetium is the workhouse of nuclear imaging. It is 80% of nuclear scans today are done by 99 technetium. And this element was discovered in 1938. Again, it was all part of uh, old projects which were concerned with uranium. So uranium was the main. So all this work was done on nuclear reactors. So once 99 technetium was discovered, then slowly and slowly people started using it. Iodine 131 also came into it. Iodine is preferentially accumulated in our thyroids. So that was used to find out the activity of the thyroid glands, and even for treating thyroid carcinoma using iodine 131. So this is how the advance started. And today, 99 technetium, as I said, it basically dominates the nuclear imaging, especially for SPECT, in which we use gamma rays. So this is like 99 technetium bisphosphonate scan for bone. It is used as a bone imaging agent. Then there are pertechnetate, normal technetium in its native state like pertechnetate. It is used. So as I said, it accumulates in the thyroid. You can see the how much the thyroid gland is showing the activity. This is dextran. It is used for infection imaging. So if somebody has an infection and if you want to see, then you can use 99 technetium labeled dextran. And ciprofloxacin is again specific for bacterial infections. So these are few scans, and this is how a scan looks like. So if a patient goes and gets a 99 technetium particular salt injected for a particular purpose, then this will be like an scan which will be seen by a clinician. So as I said, 99 technetium, what makes 99 technetium so popular is that it has a very good half-life. So all radioisotopes, they decay using the first order kinetics. So this is their half-life, which is around 6.6 hours. Very good half-life to do an imaging. It has a gamma decay, predominantly gamma decay. M stands for the metastable. So it is a metastable state of technetium which we are referring to. And it decays purely by gamma radiation. There is no other type of radiation. And third thing is that the daughter nuclei which are formed. So any isotope, when it decays, it forms daughter nuclei. And what we want is that there should be only one non-radiative daughter nuclei, and that is exactly what happens with 99 technetium as well. Not only this, 99 technetium gives a lot of versatility, as I will show you from the chemist point of view. And this is the rough scan of how much 99 technetium is being used for nuclear imaging, starting from brain, where most of the drugs do not penetrate. 99 technetium radio probes are there which are capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier and reaching the brain and giving specific information about the brain. Thyroid, the pulmonary, that is the lungs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the gallbladder, infection, hypoxia, inflammation, tumor, skeleton. So no matter what type of clinical condition is, today 99 technetium has been explored to such an extent that it can be used for imaging majority of clinical symptoms. So how did it all start? In 1960, it was Powell Richards who gave the idea that the technetium can be used as a medical tracer. And somewhere around 1963 and 66, various reports came into being which showed that the 99 technetium tracers can be used. And as I said, that these mostly was the product of uranium. So even today, it is produced using highly enriched and low enriched uranium in nuclear reactors. And these are the various locations where 99 technetium is produced. And then either we import it. We have some self-reliance now in terms of 99 technetium, but majority of it is imported. Mostly Canada has been on the forefront of 99 technetium production. So these are the various tracers. So this is the kidney. So kidney scanning, 99 technetium, MAG3, DTPA, DMSA, NTA. Why so many analogs? Because one of them will be having some added features. For example, 99 technetium versus 99 technetium DMSA. DMSA is much better for, because it is much safer. It can be used for children. But what I want to show here is the way the technetium is using its chemistry. It is not restricted to one core. There is a technetium oxo core, there is a technetium carbonyl core, there is a technetium nitrito core, and not only restricted to one type of ligand. So this is an S4 type of arrangement. This is N3O2 type of arrangement for chelation of technetium, then N2 and N3S type of arrangement. Similarly, we have many perfusion agents which are there for the brain, for the heart. So we have 99 technetium, which is having an anionic type of arrangement, which basically predominantly accumulates in the cells because of their negative potential. So once it gets inside the cell, it gets positively charged, and then it gets trapped into the negative potential. So this is like a anion cation type of an arrangement. Again, 99 technetium has been loaded with CN, that is isonitrile type of linkages. And then we have various other ligands as well as the cores of the 99 technetium. So 99 technetium demonstrates lot of versatility. It has a oxidation state ranging from +7 till -1. It has a variable coordination number. And because of this, it has found wide application. Now, all these are non-targeted. So there's nothing which makes them very specific. There's a DTPA. DTPA is a chelating agent. So a DTPA is there with technetium, but there's nothing like a biomolecule attached with it. But there are molecules like the brain, 99M-TRODAT, which is basically used for dopamine transporters, having biomolecules. So this is a tropane analog, which is attached to 99 technetium. And this is the only 99 technetium brain tracer for receptor imaging. So there are multiple types of 99 technetium, both targeted as well as untargeted. So this is called as a targeted radiopharmaceutical. Not only that, INMAS also has been on the forefront. So I will be also covering a part of the research which INMAS has been doing. So INMAS was among one of those institutes who basically gave the idea of 99 technetium methionine SPECT. So this is like a poor man's tracer. 99 technetium is very easily available. It is available through generator. It doesn't require very high infrastructure for production because we usually import it. And This is one of the analog which can be used to diagnose cancer at par with the PET imaging, which is much more considered to be much more specific than SPECT. But 99 technetium methionine derivative, this is an amino acid based radiopharmaceutical targeted using methionine, and that also can be used for cancer imaging in clinics. Now, these were all small molecules. Over the years, the nanoparticles have also been gaining momentum. And so 99 technetium nanoparticles are also there. Various systems which are quite complicated in nature have been radio-labeled with 99 technetium. For example, this is a liposomal particle comprising of nucleolipids. So there's a nucleoside having long chain fatty acids, and these self-assemble into supra aggregates having supramolecular interactions. So these aggregates are also being tried for liposomal delivery, and see the pattern the way 99 technetium has chelated here. It is chelated through the uridine nitrogen systems. So it basically sits in between the various nucleosides which are protruding from the surface of the liposome. Here, the technetium carbonyl core has been used for targeting of the nanoparticles. So these are gold and ferrous nanoparticles for MRI imaging, and these also have been conjugated with 99 technetium. The silica nanoparticles bearing NH2 as a functionality have also been used for chelation of 99 technetium. So by all these examples, I want to emphasize is that there are a number of ways the way 99 technetium can be appended to the system, or the radioconjugation can be carried out. Even we have used dithiocarbamate linkages. Now we have been trying to make brain receptor imaging. So these are the different biomolecules which make it targeted towards particular receptors. In this case, it is towards 5-HT1A, 5-HT7. 5-HT stands for serotonin receptors. Serotonin receptors, dopamine receptors, norepinephrine receptors. These are some of the neurotransmitters and the receptors which are widely found in brain, and they have huge implication in many neurological disorders, including depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, various other disorders. So if you want to make a specific probe to find out how many such receptors are there, what is their distribution, what is their density, how it is getting varied with disease, one can make such systems using dithiocarbamate, and we have used dithiocarbamate linkage for chelation of 99 technetium. This is again serotonin, which is basically the natural ligand for serotonin receptors. This was also functionalized using dithiocarbamates. And all these systems, both the systems were conjugated with 99 technetium. Now, as a chemist, when I make such systems, I have to undergo all the chemical characterization which a chemist is expected to do. So we have the mass spectrometry, the NMR spectrometry, the UV visible data, IR data. Various analytical tools are used for characterization. Then we do a lot of in vitro testing, which includes hemolysis, the effect your molecule will have on RBCs, the effect the molecule will have on, uh, will the 99 technetium go out from the system. So 99 technetium has a lot of resemblance with cysteine. So it can go and get into the cysteine metalloenzyme. So we have to see whether it can leave your molecule and go in the cysteine containing molecules. So all those studies are carried out, and then ultimately the final validation is done preclinically by injecting in mice or rabbit, and we see whether there's a brain accumulation or not. So this is sectioning of the brain. We have also found out the regional brain uptake, what happens in these radioligands. So as I said, because these imaging modalities, they require molecules, and these molecules are nothing, but they're very similar to molecular probes. They are like stains and dyes, which basically we use in histology. So they hook to a particular target, and then they produce a contrast. So this is what exactly this 99 technetium molecule is also doing. It is going and it is attaching itself to 5-HT1A or 5-HT7. And because it keeps on accumulating there, then it generates a signal which we see it using a SPECT scan. Now, tracer design is a very complicated thing. It is an iterative iterative process. So like any drug development process, it keeps on, we keep on refining it, we keep on repeating it till the time we will not have an ideal radio tracer, which practically is very difficult, but ultimately we keep on doing it to improve on the properties of the radio tracer. Now, a radio tracer basically consists of two parts. So first part is the affinity component, which is served by a molecule. This is the biomolecule, which will be the affinity component. Now, this is interacting with the target and it is responsible for hooking this radiopharmaceutical into the target. And these can be either small molecules, they can be peptides, they can be nucleic acids, they can be monoclonal antibodies, they can be recombinant proteins. So number of biomolecules can serve as the affinity component. And this is the signaling component, like 99 technetium, which is basically generating a signal, a gamma ray, which is being detected by the SPECT scanner. If it is a positron emitting radioisotope, then it is producing photons of two photons with 511 kilo electron volts energy, and that is being detected by the PET scanner. So these are the signaling components. And to fuse both of them, the signaling component as well as the biomolecule, we use variety of linker, we use chelates to bind to the metal radioisotopes. So because of all this, there are lots of disturbances, both electronic as well as steric. So this is what a chemist investigates, the electronic disturbances which are happening because of this conjugation, as well as the steric disturbances which are happening, and how these disturbances are affecting the binding affinity. Are they changing the binding pattern? Is the antagonist going towards an agonist mode of binding, or an agonist is becoming antagonist? Is there a competitive inhibition with the natural substrate, or a non-competitive inhibition after you modify this ligand or substrate? So all those studies are done by a chemist. And we also look into in modulating these linker parameters so that we can have advanced pharmacokinetics. Sometimes you might like to decrease the enzymatic activity which is happening, which is degrading the product. So we change the linkages, different type of linkages are there which we use. We can also make them more susceptible linkers so that there is a stimuli responsiveness in the radioprobe. So we use different type of linkages to make the radioprobe suited for our application. And so there is a geometry optimization, linker optimization, confirmation of binding efficacy, confirmation of binding mode. So these are different type of studies which we carry out along with the stability and binding constants. So this plays a very important role whether our radiopharmaceutical is stable or not. Will this leach out? If it will leach out, then it will cause a metal linked toxicity. So all those parameters are investigated by a chemist while developing a radiopharmaceutical. And how do we design a biomolecule? So there are broadly 4 approaches on which we can choose an affinity component. Sometimes it is based on metabolic reprogramming. The most common example or the most famous example being deoxyglucose. Deoxyglucose has recently also been launched as an anti-COVID drug. However, it works on the mechanism that it is a glucose analog. It gets preferentially entrapped into the cell, and the cell, like cancer, which has hypoxia inducible factor, which is HIF, overexpressed. Because of this, there's a lot of glucose intake because these cells are undergoing a lot of metabolism in terms of division of cells. So there is an enhanced glucose uptake. The 2-deoxyglucose preferentially goes inside the cell, sits there. It cannot be further metabolized because the hexokinase does not recognize it because there is no OH in the 2' position, and then it gets trapped into the cell. So a cancer cell will keep on trapping 2DG much more than a normal cell, and then once we do a scan, we will get a signal, a contrast between a cancer versus a normal cell. So that is the principle of 2DG. A similar but slightly different is because there is a lot of cellular proliferation and growth, the cells are dividing rapidly. The nuclei is also dividing and rapidly. So there's an enhanced uptake of nucleosides. So if we can label the nucleosides, these nucleosides will be incorporated into the dividing cells. And then there will be a preferential localization or contrast between, again, the cancer cell versus the normal cells. Then cancer or any neurological disease is also associated with an altered physiological status. So there will be a change in the pH, there is a change in redox status. These cells tend to be more hypoxic in nature. These cells tend to be more acidic in nature. So we can also use an altered physiological status to make stimuli responsive, microenvironment stimuli responsive probes like nitroimidazole. So nitroimidazole is one such moiety. It was a serendipity discovery. Nitroimidazole are basically antibiotics which are isolated from bacteria. And a lot of work was going on during World War II on isolation of antibiotics and an accidental co-administration of nitroimidazole also pointed on its efficacy towards tumor because tumors can become hypoxic if they become if they are very invasive in nature. So they are basically depleted of oxygen. So nitroimidazole, when it goes inside the system, it undergoes a 1 electron reduction rather than a 2 electron reduction. In a normal cell, it goes a 2 electron reduction. Here it undergoes 1 electron reduction and then it attaches itself to a biomacromolecule like a protein and gets entrapped. So ultimately, all these three pathways are basically selective entrapment of a biomolecule. And then we are obviously appending it with some signaling component, and either we are using for PET imaging or SPECT imaging. The fourth approach is altered receptor expression. This is more valid for where there's a difference in the receptor expression. It also happens in cancer. So there are folate receptors which are overexpressed. Similarly, in neurological disorders, there's an altered receptor expression level. Some receptors are overexpressed, some are underexpressed, some have a different form of expression levels. So those, like I said, 5-HT1 and 5-HT7. So these can also be used in deciding an affinity component for a radio tracer. For example, in this case, which I had shown earlier, where we had made a radio tracer using the natural ligand, that is serotonin. Now this is basically an agonist. So we wanted to see how many receptor population is there which will preferentially bind to only agonist. So those are the active receptor forms which only bind to the agonist, whereas the antagonist, it binds to both the inactive as well as inactive form. It does not show discrimination between the two forms of the receptor. So we basically wanted to design a ligand which can give us preferential information about the active form. And for this, we had used this serotonin. We appended it with dithiocarbamate. As I said, we did all the characterization, the NMR and the mass, and then ultimately conjugated it with 99 technetium and did the evaluation. Also, we carry out a lot of theoretical work so that we can find out what type of binding pattern are there. Is there a change in binding pattern? What type of binding affinity is expected for this compound? Is it a good to go compound or should we stop even before synthesizing it? So all those studies also run parallel by a chemist so that we can have a strong basis for selection as well as synthesis of these compounds. Now, this was all about the affinity component. The second question comes about radioisotope. 99 technetium is not the only available anywhere and everywhere. So we use 99 technetium. But is this the only consideration to find out? No. The end consideration is also what is our application. So as I said, we wanted to develop a probe for cancer which can be used without much economic considerations. So we've also made 99 technetium methionine so that we can do an imaging using a SPECT for cancer. So the question is, which nuclear isotope should be used? The answer to this is basically what type of application we want to do. Do we only want to do diagnosis? Do we want to do therapy? Or do we want to do diagnosis such that we can later pursue therapy as well? So that determines what type of radioisotope is selected. As I said, Y is based upon application, the methodology, how we will introduce these radioisotopes into the molecule, as well as the future. So what is the end result? Is it that we have to also see the treatment progression using the same radioisotope? So for example, 99 technetium can serve as a diagnostic agent, but 211 astatine will serve as a therapeutic agent because it is an alpha emitting radioisotope. So if we want to see cancer, we can use 99 technetium. But if we want to kill cancer, then we will use 211 astatine. However, now there are a number of combinations of metal ions, because if I'm using a probe of 99 technetium, it is not necessary it will show me the same pharmacokinetic and it will show the distribution pattern similar. There will be accumulation in tumor, but it might have a very different pharmacokinetic behavior. So if I have to use 211 astatine for therapy later on, I will be making a radioprobe using gallium, because gallium and astatine are very similar to each other. So I will use gallium as the nuclear isotope for diagnostics, so that a similar type of system can be used for both monitoring as well as later therapy. The second research question, as I said, is also dependent on the availability. Where are these being produced? How are they being produced? If they are not being produced at your end, that is at the end of where the radiopharmaceutical is getting developed, then who is producing and where is producing, and how accessible the radioisotope is. So even if 44 scandium might be one of the best metal radioisotopes available right now, we are not using 44 scandium because we are not producing it, and we can't get it in India that easily. So we are still relying on 99 technetium or 68 gallium for our radio labeling purposes. So for 99 technetium, as I said, initially it was all about uranium chemistry being explored. So it was reactor based, and that is why we have many reactors which produce 99 technetium. They package it into a form of a generator. Generator is like a cow. So you basically milk the radioisotope from it. It is that analogy. So basically it is packed with a radioisotope, and we keep on pushing a solvent which helps us eluting the radioisotope. So these are called as the cow for a particular radioisotope. But other than that, now there are different strategies which can be used for the production, like the proton accelerator. So an example of a proton accelerator is cyclotron. Then there are electron accelerators. So these are linear accelerators. So this will be a long tube through which the electrons will be accelerated, and then they will be bombarded on a particular target. It can be 238 uranium or 100 molybdenum. Similarly, the proton accelerators can also use multiple targets. And then there are deuterium accelerators, again done in cyclotron. And you can produce 99 technetium through any of these pathways. But all the pathways are not as yielding or as easy to do. And this is the work of a nuclear chemist to find out what type of a production pathway will be the best suited for a particular radioisotope, not only restricted to 90M technetium, but also to any other radioisotope, which makes it more economically viable and more easy at hand. It should be available readily so that one can do a radio labeling. So obviously this all advancement was possible by the introduction of cyclotron. So the cyclotron was nearly founded in 1940s. This is the same time as the World War II, and E.W. Lawrence has been credited with the development of cyclotron. And because of this, it was possible to not only restrict our radioisotope work to metallic radioisotopes, but also to the non-metallic, that is the non-metallic halogen-based, carbon-based radioisotopes. So 11 carbon, 18 fluorine, nitrogen 13. These are different radioisotopes which are used for the development of radiopharmaceutical. And the advantages, like I said, there is a lot of electronic disturbance when the metals are there, because not only in the biomolecule you require the signaling component, you also require something which will hold these metallic radioisotopes. So particularly chelate systems are there, which are high in electronic demand. So there will be an electronic rearrangement, as well as there will be a lot of steric hindrance also. The advantage of using these molecules is that they mimic, like fluorine mimics carbon hydrogen bond. So an introduction of fluorine will not make much difference to the affinity of the compound. But at the same time, these are very expensive radionuclides because they have a very short half-life. The maximum being of 18 fluorine, which is 110 minutes. So within 110 minutes, the half-life, the radioisotope activity starts to decay. So everything has to be very fast, and this requires that the cyclotron has to be very close to the PET center where the imaging is taking place. So this makes them very economically demanding. but at the same time, some advantages are there. So fluorine 18 has been one of the most widely used radioisotope, along with 11 carbon to some extent. But fluorine 18 is certainly the, if 99 technetium is the workhorse for SPECT imaging, fluorine 18 is the workhorse for PET. So PET imaging, and you think of a target and it has been actually labeled with 18 fluorine. So there is FDG, as I said, the one which relies on metabolic reprogramming. Then there is FLT, which is basically nucleoside-based probe, again on cellular proliferation. There is choline. Choline, the basis remains the same, that there is an increase in the cellular membrane because the cells are dividing. So there's an increase in the choline requirement. So fluorine 18 choline. Then the amino acids, again the same logic, because the cells are dividing, they're high on metabolic requirement, and so we can use amino acids. Then there are peptides. Different type of peptides are there. This I will be taking up lately with 68 gallium. Then there is DOPA. These are the neurotransmitters, amino precursors, amino acid precursors also, and as well as the neurotransmitters. So DET, that is dopamine, norepinephrine, as well as serotonin. And these are different type of entry mechanisms. So like FDG enters through the GLUT mechanisms, glucose transporters, choline through the choline transporters, LET1, LET2 are basically for the amino acids. So these rely on the active transport mechanism. Similarly, we have ENT and CNT, which is equilibrative nucleotides, as well as competitive nucleotide transporters, which are for nucleosides. So these are also there. Then we have lots of peptides are there which have been labeled, like the galacto-RGT. So this is basically about integrins, which are in the extracellular matrix. So these have been labeled to find out the aggressiveness in tumors. Then there is a FASA meso copper ATSM. These are basically hypoxia. So they are relying on the microenvironment. These are microenvironments simulated radio tracers. Similarly, we have acetate. FES is another radio tracer. Then there is perfusion using O15. So O15 is the radioisotope which we use for PET imaging. So basically water is getting radio labeled, and then we are seeing how the radio labeled water is moving inside the body. Then there are gene therapies, which are basically guanosine analogs, which are used to monitor the gene therapy. And then there are annexin to see the apoptosis. So these have also been labeled with 18 fluorine. So 18 fluorine has been extensively used, but yes, it comes with some price, and that is often on-site cyclotron. Whereas 99 technetium, it is generator produced. So I said it is like a cow. You are milking, you have a 99 moly, which was produced in a reactor, but now it has been processed in the form of a generator. So small institutes, they buy generators, and then they keep on eluting 99 technetium. 99 moly is getting converted into 99 technetium. 99 moly has a half-life of 66 hours. So it gets converted into 99 technetium, and then you elute it and you get the 99 technetium. This entire arrangement is again a chemist perspective of how one will separate 99 moly with 99 technetium, because there will be some leaching of 99 moly as well. And even when it is being produced from uranium, how it will be separated so that you have a generator only of 99 moly. So these are different aspects which a chemist looks into. The cartridges, the solvent system, the extraction system, these are different steps which one uses. And then the overall synthesis of the radio probe for diagnosis. With time, further advancement in 99M technetium is preparation of kits. So there are ready-to-use kits which are supplied to the hospitals. Then they add 99 technetium. The chemistry is well established, and so one can make 99 technetium in a hospital and then inject it. So lot of feasibility is there in 99 technetium as compared to 18 fluorine. But 18 fluorine has better resolution. It is used for a technique which is much more sensitive. So as I said, 18 fluorine has a short half-life. So another PET radioisotope is gallium. It is a metallic radioisotope. So gallium was also in somewhere around 1978 to 1982, it was discovered. And this 68 gallium, again, it comes in the form like 99 technetium. It comes in a generator form. So there's a germanium gallium generator which is there, and gallium is eluted so that it can be used for labeling of the radio probes. So this is like a gallium scan. The beauty of gallium is, as I said, there are two radioisotopes. One is apt for SPECT, the 67 gallium. The 68 gallium is for, sorry, this has to be PET. So 68 gallium is for the PET. So the advantage is you make one molecule system, you can use it for SPECT imaging, you can use it for PET imaging, and further, because of its similarity with astatine, you can even use it for therapy. So one radio probe with known chemistry, known pharmacokinetics, not much change. Even if you will change the metal ion, the chelate system remains the same. Whatever disturbance is there is happening inside the chelate system, not affecting the affinity of the biomolecule. And the same system can be used for imaging with SPECT, it can be used with PET as well as therapy. So gallium citrate is used for infection imaging. So these are different infection sites which are there. This is the image of a kidney transplant patient who had some infection in its right kidney. So that can be seen using a 67 gallium citrate. And this is the PSMA, prostate specific membrane antigen. So this is for the prostate cancer imaging. So a scan earlier could not diagnose the prostate cancer, the recurrence of these prostate cancer, which was much more established using a 68 gallium PET scan. So these are some of the applications of the gallium. And as I said, as technetium is there, so are gallium. So we have a 68 chalcone derivative, which is basically for brain imaging of amyloids. This is our in-house research. Then other than that, there are a number of molecules which have been used for gastric releasing peptides, appended with gastric releasing peptides for GRP scanning. Then somatostatin receptors for somatostatin targeted therapy, SSTR for neuroendocrine tumors. The most famous case being that of the film actor who was diagnosed by neuroendocrine tumor, Irfan Khan. So these are those analogs which can be used. There are DOTA TAG system which can be used for the imaging of neuroendocrine system. Then there is infection, as I said, gallium 67 gallium citrate, which can be used for infection imaging. This is for the chemokine receptors, which are found in hematopoietic cells, endothelial cells, neurons, stem cells. Multiple cells have CXCF4 system, which can be imaged through gallium. And then there is a myocardial imaging as well as for oncology and inflammation using bradykinin receptors. This is not the limited list. The list is more extensive. I have shown some of the receptors which can be targeted using 68 gallium and peptide-based systems. Majority of them are peptide-based systems. There's one more feature which majority of these show. Can anyone say what is the other feature which most of these molecules are showing? Okay. So basically, they all have macrocycle systems. The 68 gallium and the macrocycle systems are there. So they are there's extensive chelation of gallium, which is there. And why this chelation is necessary? Because gallium is very much similar to iron. So like the iron in the porphyrin can get replaced by gallium. So this is one of the toxicity thing which one has to check while designing a gallium-based probe. And this, to ensure this, we have high chelating agents which have high thermodynamic stability as well as kinetic stability. So they do not allow the gallium to move away from them. So like DOTA, NOTA, TRAP, NOTGA, CP, even DTPA. DTPA is the linear chelator which is there, but DOTA, these are the cyclic systems which are there. So what a chemist does is that these macrocycles are there, but they have to be fine-tuned. They cannot be used as they are. I have to even attach my biomolecule. I have to even optimize this cavity size if I can do that. So a chemist also works on the development of macrocycles because they play a very important role in chelation of the radioisotopes, and that will further have an impact on the stability and the safety of the radiopharmaceutical. So these are different type of systems which we have developed. This is one in-house developed system in which we have modulated the cavity size only for gallium. Like DOTA is a well-known chelator for number of different radioisotopes. So certainly it has a bigger cavity size. This one we have fine-tuned only for gallium. So this is a gallium-specific macrocycle. And we have also given the site where we can attach the biomolecule. So basically chemist looks for amine, acid, hydroxyl, halogen. These are the sites which a chemist look for conjugation with biomolecule. And so these are the different molecules which we have synthesized. So as I said, that if you want to do therapy after imaging can be done by gallium, but there is no analog. For therapy, one requires an alpha emitter. So we can do the therapy using astatine. Astatine is one of the it has multiple radioisotopes, multiple isotopes. So there are some specific isotopes which we are interested in, particularly the 211 gallium, which has 42% alpha emission. So these are different type of astatines which one is interested in. And again, with any radiometal, the problem starts with what type of chemistry one has to do. So astatine, it has properties of a halogen plus metal. So we can use a direct labeling method, that is one can load onto the biomolecule directly astatine. So this is some of the biomolecules which is activated using NHS. This is N-hydroxysuccinimide, and this will be like a tyrosine or a tryptophan. It is a descriptive diagram. We can introduce directly astatine. So this is directly labeling of the proteins which can be done, or there can be an indirect labeling for small molecules using different methods. So these are different methods at the free will of a chemist, but they have to find out which one will work best for them. So there can be an isotope exchange, disonium salt, aryl iodinium salt, aryl tin, aryl boron, aryl tin, another pathway. So this is S1 mechanism, S2 mechanism. So these are different pathways which can be used for introduction of astatine into the radio probe. So this is one of the imaging of using 211 astatine. As the problem with astatine is that it has a similarity with iodide. So one has to be sure what type of chelate system one is using, because otherwise it will show high uptake in thyroid, stomach, as well as in macrophage bearing organs. This is very much similar to 90 technetium pertechnidate, which also shows if it leaches out from the system, then it that is system is the chelate system, then it goes into the thyroid and the stomach. And this is also serves as an indirect test to test the stability of a radiopharmaceutical preparation, that how stable the preparation is inside the inside in vivo. So these are different, and how does it goes into the thyroid. So this is the mechanism to show that. So there are different strategies. DNA incorporation can be there. There can be superficial, like 90 technetium. 90 technetium also there are untargeted agents, particularly the colloids, the RBC labeling. Similarly, 211 astatine can also be labeled on colloid particles, microspheres particle, nanoparticles. So these are superficial arrangement, attachment of 211 astatine. One can also incorporate, as I said, there can be indirect induction of the radioisotope either in the protein or in the nucleic acids, and this can be used for imaging. Or one can do a receptor enzyme pre-targeting, again very much similar to 90 technetium. And then there can be a pre-targeting approach which can be used for the introduction of astatine. So overall, the basic idea of the introduction of a radioisotope remains the same. The only factors one has to check is, once inside a chelate system, does the metal chelate complex is stable or not? And does it affect the binding affinity of the biomolecule? Then it can be introduced as a peptide like 68 gallium. It can be introduced on the proteins. It can be introduced on antibodies. So these are different biomolecules which can be labeled using astatine. So when nuclear imaging was getting developed, 1977 was the time when the first PET image was also acquired of the body. Similarly, MRI was also getting developed. Now, the advantage of MRI is that it is non-radiative. There is no radiation involved. there are RF pulses, which basically for the spin active nuclei, that is nuclei which have an spin quantum number of 1, these nuclei, when they interact with the RF pulses, they get excited to the next spin state. And when they come back, they generate a signal. So NMR is one of such machine which uses this principle, and MRI is an extension of NMR. NMR is generally used by chemists for the characterization of the substance of the compounds, as I had shown. So there were compounds which I have characterized using NMR. For example, this is an NMR spectra. So these are the signal of different protons. These protons which are in different environment, like OH is a different environment than CH. CH has a different environment than NH because they are attached to different heteroatom. So when we put RF pulse, when we subject these compounds on in a magnetic field, then the different OH, they are realign themselves according to their energy levels. And once they are de-exciting, then we measure the time in which they de-excite, convert it into the frequency domain, which is given here. So this is a carbon spectra, but we will get a similar proton spectra. And then we can find out what type of carbon or proton is there. MRI basically relies on the proton, the water molecules which are present. So MRI is basically dependent on the de-excitation of the water molecules. And Damadian was the scientist who basically constructed the first MRI machine and did a whole body scan. This was done in 1977. So this is an MRI scanner. As I said, this is a gantry, and one can do brain imaging. So it has been also used extensively for neuro, to find out the various ailments of neurological disorders. So one can find out about the infections, one can find out about Alzheimer's disease, the traumatic brain injury, what type of injuries, there are number of injuries which can happen, blast injury, traumatic brain injuries. So those type of injuries can also be mapped using the difference in the structural features of the brain using MRI. And then there's a neuroinfection, there's neuro-oncology, which can also be detected using MRI. Again, the principle is that there is a differential contrast because of the water molecules. And why this differential contrast happens because of the water molecules? Because the water molecules are in the tissue. They have a different microenvironment. Some water molecules are attached to the protein, some have a lipid environment around them, some are just a free molecule. So all these have a different relaxation parameters, which are basically given by T1 and T2 in NMR. So they have different relaxation parameters, and because of these different relaxation parameters, these water molecules exhibit different relaxation time, and then they give a contrast. The contrast is limited, but it will give a contrast. So a free water molecule may be a more brighter or less brighter as compared to a water molecule which is attached to a protein. So this type of a contrast is obtained. So as I said, different water molecules, even around a macromolecule, there are layers of water molecules experiencing different microenvironment. So they will all have different relaxation times. It will depend on the concentration of the macromolecules which are there in a particular tissue. More the proteins, the T1 time will keep on decreasing, and the state of the macromolecules, whether they are in the lipid environment or whether they are in the hydrophilic environment, hydrophobic environment, crystal, enamel, collagen. So different structural will also result in a different relaxation parameter of water molecules. And this ultimately gives a contrast which can be viewed like a dark or a light image in an MRI scan. But we are not restricted here. As a chemist, we can fine tune this contrast property also. So for this image, which was without a contrast, we can convert this image to this image, which can be much more easy to see, much more, giving much more details as compared to this image where there is no contrast injected. But what does a contrast do? It basically interplay between the water molecules and the tissue. So it is further enhancing the effect of this water molecules by coming in between the tissue and somehow modulating the relaxation parameters of these water molecules. Again, the design is more or less same like a molecular probe. So firstly, there's a vector or a biomolecule. There can be a linker or a polymer to enhance the pharmacokinetic parameters. And then there is a metal ion as well as a chelating agent. Now, because this is all about magnetism, certainly not the radioisotopes, metals which will have some magnetic behavior. And this is usually given by paramagnetic metals. So a metal which is paramagnetic in nature will have a role to play in enhancing the contrast. And what these contrast agents do is they will modulate the T1 or the T2 parameters so that we have some differential contrast coming into play. So the paramagnetic metal ion here is gadolinium. It is a lanthanide. It is in the series, so it is a lanthanide. And gadolinium has very unique properties. The first one being it has 7 unpaired electrons. It has a 4f shell which has 7 unpaired electrons. When it becomes +3, these 3 electrons go away. And because of this, the 7 unpaired electrons, it has a lot of paramagnetic nature in them. Further, gadolinium has some intrinsic property which make it even more suitable to be used as a contrast agent. The first one is it has an electronic relaxation rate which is at par with that of a proton. So in this, playing a role between the water molecules and the tissue, the gadolinium is much more effective because it is much more able to communicate with the water molecules. So what happens is that we activate these water molecules, but because gadolinium has properties which are fine-tuned with these water molecules, they transfer the magnetization to gadolinium. And in turn, their relaxation rate changes. So their relaxation rate becomes shorter as compared to the relaxation rate here. And this results in a positive contrast because they are available for more and more signal enhancement. So that is how the gadolinium plays a role in the contrast. And it modulates. So gadolinium not only affects the T1, it also affects the T2, but we are more interested in T1 for gadolinium. The T2 modulation is done more by the nanoparticles, the paramagnetic nanoparticles. But I will be concentrating here more on gadolinium. There is an effect on T2, not much pronounced effect. So what we have is that the gadolinium firstly gives a positive contrast because of its influence on T1. Later, because of its influence on T2, we start getting a negative contrast, and this is like a maximum intensity. So the maximum optimum concentration of gadolinium, which will give us the best contrast. And the T1 parameter and T2 parameters are basically defined by relaxivity, which we calculate using by the dependence of T1 on concentration of gadolinium. So we have relations through which we can calculate the relaxivity parameters. Now again, the problem with gadolinium is it is very much similar to calcium. So if it is in system, it can lead to toxicity. It interferes with the calcium signaling. It can be replaced by receptors and enzymes which have calcium. And calcium is a very important nutrient in our body. So one has to basically again chelate gadolinium. We have non-ionic, ionic, we have linear and macrocyclic chelates for gadolinium, DOTA being one of them. Again, we have BOPTA, DTPA, TTPA analogs are there, DOTA analogs are there. Again, very much similar to a radioisotope, but now the metal ion is non-radiative. It is gadolinium, which is paramagnetic. But the basic design features remain the same. We have to introduce the biomolecule. We have to fine tune the properties. We have to look into the electronic disturbance, which can be caused into the biomolecule. All those parameters remain the same even for the development of the gadolinium contrast agents. And this is a detailed version. So there are a number of parameters. There is a famous theory, SVM theory for gadolinium contrast agent. It says that the net relaxivity which is observed. So this is the primary coordinated water molecule. Gadolinium has a good coordination number of 8 to 9. And one coordination number while designing the gadolinium ligands is reserved for the water molecule so that these can coordinate together. Because if we will have more water molecules, then there's an inherent instability and the complex will degrade. So we have water molecules which are attached. Maximum we can have 2 water molecules, but majority of the times there is a single water molecule interacting with gadolinium. And this gadolinium, this water molecule interacts with the other layer of the water molecule. So this is the inner, this is the outer, and then there is the further outer layer of the water molecules. So the net change in the relaxivity is sum total of whatever relaxivity parameters are getting reflected into the different layers of water molecule. And there are 4 parameters which are very important. The first parameter is how much time, the residence time of this water molecule with the gadolinium. So that is called as the water relaxation time. Then there's an electronic relaxation, which I said is very good for gadolinium. Gadolinium is like 6,600 times more efficient in taking the magnetization from this water molecule onto itself. So the electronic relaxation rate, that has to be fine-tuned. Then there is a tumbling rate. So whatever the ligand is there, it tumbles in the, because there is a magnetic field, so it tumbles. So this is called as the molecular rotation. So molecular rotation also plays a role. If it is too fast, then also it is not good. If it is too slow, also it is not good. When we have to restrict the molecular rotation, we can make them targeted towards receptor. So this will act like an anchor, and this will not allow the molecule to tumble. So these are different strategies through which we can fine-tune these little parameters like molecular rotation. Electronic relaxation is beyond our hand, but water exchange time, number of bound water molecules, and the molecular rotation can be modulated by a chemist. And this is exactly what I will be showing how we have modulated it. Before I move to that, so how people have used gadolinium. So this is a fine design. This is one of the finest example of design. This compound was used for calcium sensing. Calcium, as I said, it plays a very important role, even for the toxicity with gadolinium. Otherwise, also it plays a very important role. And calcium can be released. So increased calcium intracellular concentration can have a role in Alzheimer's disease, accumulation of amyloid beta. So people wanted to quantify calcium. And how did they do was, this is the arrangement. And if we see in a 3D picture, this is the gadolinium is well embedded inside. But when the calcium molecule come in between, these calcium molecules start interacting with these oxygens, as a result of which this closed cage structure opens up. Now we can see the gadolinium which has been exposed. And now gadolinium, because it is not interacting with these oxygen, it starts interacting with the water molecule, giving rise to the required contrast in the MRI. So these are fine design strategies which can be used by chemists, making it a stimuli responsive probe. So this probe is responsive towards the calcium ion concentration. Lately, though MRI itself is inherently insensitive towards receptor imaging, receptors are in the concentration range of picomole to femtomole, whereas MRI works best for millimolar ranges. But there have been certain reports where people have used them for the development of receptor imaging, particularly in the micromolar range. So this was one of the example in which the gadolinium inside the chelate, DOTA chelate, has been conjugated with spiperon structure, which is specific for dopamine transporters. And these are some of the imaging studies which have been carried out using MRI. So this was basically a functional MRI being carried. So one can see the activation of signals which are there using this analog. And how have we tuned the properties of gadolinium? So we have also tried to develop a molecular probe for 5-HT1A. In this, because I said it is inherently insensitive towards receptor imaging, so what we did was we changed the macrocycle. So from OH, we have moved to NH2. And because of this NH2 is not as strong as OH in electron acceptance. So this results in an increased electron density in gadolinium, towards the gadolinium. And because of this, because there's an enhanced electronic density in gadolinium, it is much more able to interact with the coordinated water molecule. The residence time of water molecule increases. Now from nanoseconds, we have moved to milliseconds. So this much effect we have been able to introduce. We have a coordination water molecule, which is roughly 1. This is by fluorescence quenching studies we had carried. So we got a Q of 1.4, but it basically is towards 1 water molecule. This distance was optimized using theoretical calculations. So we have run energy minimizations. Density functional theory is one such program which uses quantum mechanical principles to find out the optimum distance between the metal ion and the water molecule. So we have used that program. So we were able to establish the distance of the water molecule. And because of this designing, we have been able to modulate the water residence time. Now, what is the effect of this? Because of this, now not as a T1 agent, but we have been able to develop this as a different MRI probe. So because there is sufficient water molecule residence time, there is another phenomena which is happening, and we have been able to utilize that for MRI imaging of the serotonin receptors. So this is the positive contrast, this is the negative contrast using the same molecule. And as I said, we have also done relaxivity measurements. Different measurements have been done to find out the optimum concentration which one can use for the contrast agent. So basically the idea is that how can we bridge the gap between a basic scientist and a clinical scientist? We are using molecular imaging, we are using it for treatment planning, how the treatment is progressing, how the disease is progressing, how the treatment is progressing, and we can monitor the treatment. And for this, we require these theranostic agents, which can be like therapy plus diagnosis or only diagnosis. But all this relies on a strong radiochemistry, including radioisotope production, radioisotope conjugation, or metal conjugation. So using all these concepts, we have been able to bridge the gap between a basic scientist and the clinical. And this is our future endeavor, to bridge this gap even more so that we can have a better treatment or cure capability. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shubhraji,
Yeah.
for delivering a very illustrious scientific talk on radiopharmaceuticals, their development, their quality control, their design, their engineering, and walking us with you through the early diagnostics development, then early stage cancer detection, and diagnostic imaging, radioisotopes, MRI agents, and then also you talked about very historical aspect of discovery in the times of Madame Curie and the stories related to that. Then also the very significant statement which is always there, that 99M technetium is the real workhorse for development of all the radiopharmaceuticals, and the milking thing also you described for those who are not knowing. And then also you touched upon the development of deoxyglucose for COVID therapy, and also the 99M technetium based kits also, which are readily available and ready to use things, which is the latest thing. And then also you talked about the design parameters for gadolinium based contrast agents. So madam, thank you so much. Within your 1.5 hours, like you have traveled with all the participants, with the organizers, right from Madam Curie to the present day anti-COVID therapies, which INMAS and DRDO is working. So thank you so much. And we are getting a lot of appreciations from all of our participants also on the chat box. So definitely I shall be having the question and answer sessions. But before that, I'm putting before you a request received from them that they want and they are requesting you to kindly share the PDF of the presentation if possible.
Yes, and that I will do. I will surely send it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. This question was actually on behalf of my participants only.
Yeah. So there were some questions in the chat box. I'm so sorry I did not see it.
I will be asking one by one. So Dr. Preeti Jain is asking how to ensure selectivity of cancer cells with 21180 or other radio isotopes over normal cells. This was the question.
Okay, so 211 acetine will remain the radioisotope. It depends on the biomolecule which you are using. So you can even introduce 211 to the glucose analog. So that is how you will have the selectivity of cancer cell. You can use any biomolecule. You can have a nucleoside, you can have a glucose, And even I showed one nucleoside which was directly radio labeled with astatine. So that will give the selectivity to astatine towards the cancer cell.
Okay, thank you, madam. Another query is from Dr. Nilima Dhingra, and
Yeah.
she is asking, how did you confirm the structure of labeled compounds? You quoted in the presentation UV or IR spectral analysis. Did they help in determining or confirming the site of labeled? Is there any common observation like kind of functional groups being preferred for technetium labeling?
Well, when we design the molecule, we already know where the 99 technetium will go. That is how we fine tune. Because if we will have multiple sites, then you are right. I will not be able to see where the radio labeling is happening. So that is the role of the chemist, that there has to be only one site where the radio labeling will take place. Because if I will have lots of NH2s or SH free, then certainly 99 technetium can get radio label at number of places. But that is what we fine tune so that we don't have to do. Otherwise, we will get mixture of molecules, which will have mixture of pharmacokinetic behavior. So some molecules may wash out slowly, some may wash out much more strongly, some may give metabolites, some may not give metabolites. So then it will be obviously a failed endeavor. So we know what is the site where the radio labeling is taking place. You are right that we can't do an NMR for a radio label compound, but we can make analogs. So for 99 technetium, we can make a rhenium analog. So rhenium and technetium behave very much similar. And then we can see or we can again perform the characterization data. Similarly for gallium, 67 and 68 gallium are radioactive, but we also do cold synthesis where we take the normal isotope of gallium, which is not radioactive. So we prepare one analog using cold synthesis, one analog using hot synthesis. Cold synthesis has done all the characterization, including NMR, mass, UV, everything is done. And hot we do only using HPLC profiling.
Thank you. We have one query from Dr. B. Shrigri. He is asking like how these chelating agents or linkers are selected. And he is also asking as a sub question that is there any link between this selection of the chelating agents and the kind of disorder we are working on?
Chelating agents, usually the golden rule is macrocycle chelates are much more stable for the simple reason because they have more chelation. So they are like a crab. They basically put the metal ion hold the metal ion much more strongly. But the problem with DOTA is that it cannot be used for 99 technetium. So if you want to make a probe for 99 technetium, then TTPA will be the better preference, even though it is a linear chelator. But if you're using 68 gallium, or if you're using even astatine, or you are using gadolinium, then a macrocycle will be better. So macrocycles have been found to perform better in terms of safety, even for gadolinium. Gadolinium DTP analog is also the Magnavist, but gadolinium DOTA is much more preferred because it is much more safer. So based on this, the chelating agents are selected. Then it also depends on your ease of synthesis. If you want to have multimeric units like dithiocarbamate, there can be a planar arrangement of 2-3 molecules because 99 technetium can have a coordination number of 6. And one dithiocarbamate will only give 2 sites. So 3 molecules are basically attaching to one 99 technetium. So that type of selection is also made depending on the end application. Second thing is if you are trying to develop a theranostic agent, that is therapy plus diagnosis, then you will make choice of a chelating agent which can serve for both radioisotope. So you will have a best possible which will chelate both the metal ions at par. So these are some considerations when we are choosing chelating agents. For the linkers, linker is all if your compound is going acidic hydrolysis, then you will use linkers which are much more not susceptible towards acid hydrolysis. So you will not use ester linkage. You might not use amide linkage. You might use click chemistry to make a triazole linkage, which is not even recognized by body enzymes. So these are different type of linkers which can be used.
And we have 3 questions which are actually interlinked with each other.
Okay.
So one of them is actually touching upon two others. So I'm reading that one.
Yeah.
All the molecules studies for labeling with technetium seems to be having high molecular weight. Is not it going to affect absorption or bioavailability?
Yes, these molecules do have high molecular weight, but more than absorption, it is about yes. So for like blood-brain barrier, we have a log B concentration consideration. So if you have a very high molecular weight, according to the rules of blood-brain barrier permeation, they might not cross. But if you have a lipophilicity to balance it, then they can cross. So all these are basically molecule-specific requirements. It does happen that we make a molecule and it does not crosses. That also happens. But basically, these are depending on the molecule. And certainly, it will affect the absorption, it will affect the bioavailability, it will affect the biopharmacokinetic parameter. It will affect.
Thank you. And one participant, Dr. Tirumala, is asking about what is the pharmacovigilance on 2-DG for COVID therapy? Like I think he wants to know the pharmacovigilance status of the 2-DG, which has been like in the media and press.
Yeah, and in mass
for
is
COVID
there.
therapy. Yeah, and
Well, we
INMAS has
are
been in the
undergoing
spotlight.
clinical trials as of right now. 2DG was slightly not my forte because for COVID especially, it's not my forte because molecular radiopharmaceuticals are not, they do not come under the DCGI Act. Till recently, they were not coming under DCGI Act because they are used in very minimal amounts. So the basic idea is that they do not enhance any therapeutic response. They do not have any effect. The only effect is because of the radiation. Other things are only for hooking. So they do not have their own therapeutic response. 2DG is a well-established drug for cancer. It has been studied extensively for cancer. And this is also an extension for COVID therapy. Apart from that, there have been stages of clinical trials which they have been undergoing. So there is a full pharmacovigilance which is there.
Madam,
In line
actually,
with
I am getting so much of appreciation messages for you that for me to find the real queries is getting hard. It was excellent
how to
session,
use
informative
cyclotron
session,
in
excellent,
bioengineering.
madam, very informative session. Like, thank you,
Dr.
ma'am.
Suresh,
Nice talk. Like,
Dr.
and
Suresh
then
Kumar has
to
asked.
find the real queries is it's really hard. So one Dr. Suresh Kumar, the
Yeah.
participant is asking how to use cyclotron in bioengineering. Like if you have any interlinkaging idea. Like he is asking the usage of cyclotron in bioengineering. If you
I
can throw some
sort
light
of
on
did not get
cyclotron.
this question because cyclotron is an accelerating particle. It accelerates particle. It's an accelerating device. So you will have proton or neutron at very high energies. After that, you use it for bombarding. So you will basically change you will make a radioisotope of your choice. And then you can use it for whatever purpose. Cyclotron specifically, uh, well, yeah, if you want to use an accelerated proton to give some radiation dose or some damage to the cells, then you can use cyclotron. So you can extract a beam out from cyclotron and uh, just expose your cell lines to that beam, and you can see what is the impact of highly accelerating proton. So it's a sort of a radiation effect of radiation on the cell line. That is about biological effects.
I'm taking up the last question for the session. Dr. Dhingra is asking about the software for dynamic simulations, like if you have any
Yeah.
idea.
So what we have used is we had a Schrodinger software. It's a paid software, and there's a Desmond package which we use for molecular dynamics. Other than that, freely available softwares are not many for molecular dynamics, but you can buy a package and then you can use the molecular dynamics, or you write to the people who have developed it. So for Desmond, you can write to their people who have developed it, and then they can give a license. Modeler is one software which gives license. That also has homology modeling as well as dynamics. So you can use Modeler if you want. So there are few
Thank you, Dr.
softwares
Saroj.
which you can get, but you have to get the license from their inventors.
Thank you, Dr. Chaturvedi, having so much of patience and attending to all our queries, and our participants are definitely benefited with your talk and with your answers to the queries. Harsh, can you go to the next slide? We shall be, since this is the digital time and we are unable to offer any souvenirs and other things. So here is the digital certificate for you, madam, in your honor and respect. And we shall be sending the hard copy of the same by meeting you personally in INMAS, and we shall be having a meeting and giving the same to you there itself.
It's entirely my pleasure to be here, and I'm so the only drawback with online is that there is no interaction, so one can't figure out really how much it, but certainly with the comments of the people, I think I was able to do some justice with the topic.
Definitely,
And
ma'am, definitely. Definitely. I mean, all the participants, they are completely excited and geared up with your talk, and it gives enthusiasm and encouragement to us also, to the organizing team as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for gracing the session. Here we complete day 1 of Atal FDP and hope to see you all tomorrow at 10 a.m. Until then, everyone is requested to please mark their attendance in the Google form shared with you all in the WhatsApp group by 6 p.m. Thank you for joining in. Have a good evening.
I request all the participants to kindly put the attendance as per the list which I have already shared in the group. The list contains your name as per your own application form which you have filed during applying to the workshop, and the roll number allotted as per the first come first served basis. And kindly put up the name and roll number only as per the list, so that makes our job also easy. And we have to also then feed the same thing in the AICT portal also. And as far as I was also receiving some queries regarding feedback link, so the feedback will be taken only on the 5th day, because the feedback link becomes active on the portal after day 5, when we declare that the FDP gets completed. After that, you are most welcome to go to the Atal FDP once again and log in and then give your feedback. Thank you so much to all of you for having patience and walking with us through this educational journey. See you tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.